There's something about starting fresh that feels both exciting and scary. I just moved to the big city a few days ago. It was a choice I made because I wanted to grow in my career, not because I hated my old life. My old town was small and quiet, where everyone knew each other's business. It was too calm, too safe maybe. I lived on the edge of the city, where nights were silent and the streets were empty. But I wanted something different. I wanted to make a name for myself. The job offer in the city was too good to ignore. It was a chance to climb higher, to do bigger things. So, I packed my things and left behind the peaceful, almost too tight life of my old town. My new apartment was small but cozy. It was squeezed between two huge buildings that made me feel like the city was always pressing down on me. I was alone, but I could hear the constant noise around me. People walking by on the streets below, cars honking in the distance, and the never-ending hum of city life kept me awake at night. On my third night in the city, some of my new co-workers invited me out. I thought it was the perfect chance to relax and get to know them better. Maybe even make some friends. We decided to meet downtown, where the streets were full of life. The bright neon lights flickered above us as we walked through the busy streets, laughing and talking. They were a friendly group. Chris was the loudest, always telling jokes. Eleanor was quieter but had a sharp, funny way of speaking. Jason was the one I felt closest to, someone who seemed just as lost in the city as I did. We wandered through the crowded streets, the lights from the shops and bars casting long shadows on the ground. We looked for a place to sit and relax. Chris stretched his arms out and yawned dramatically. "I could use a drink," he said. "Yeah, somewhere with good food," Jason added. We walked past one packed bar after another, but none of them felt right. We weren't in a hurry, the night was still young, and our conversation flowed easily. As we turned a corner, I heard a faint sound coming from an alley between two tall, dirty buildings. It wasn't a clear noise, just a low hum or a quiet whisper. I looked toward the alley, trying to see what it was. "Hey, hang on a sec," I said softly, almost to myself. I stepped away from the group and glanced back, but they were too busy talking to hear me. Curiosity got the best of me, and I took a few steps into the dark alley, peering into the shadows. All I saw was a narrow path lined with trash cans. The walls were grimy and damp, but something felt wrong. It felt like the alley was pulling me in. I kept walking, thinking I'd just take a quick look and then go back to my friends. But the more I walked, the more twisted the alley became. The straight path I entered was suddenly full of turns, leading me through narrow, winding back alleys that seemed to change with every step I took. I should have turned around. I should have called Jason or one of the others. But for some strange reason, I kept going, half amused and half annoyed at myself for getting lost in this maze of alleys. By the time I realized how deep I had wandered, it was around 9 o'clock. The buildings towered above me, blocking out the sky, and the alleys grew darker and more oppressive. I reached for my phone, thinking I should call one of my friends and tell them where I was or make up an excuse for disappearing. I didn't want to admit that I was lost. As I scrolled through my contacts, a dim green light caught my eye. I looked up and saw a small sign glowing in the distance above an entranceway, barely visible in the narrow alley. The light flickered, casting strange shadows on the brick walls. Curious, I walked closer, squinting as the sign became clearer. It read, "The Lost Bar." I couldn't help but laugh at the name. It fit the maze of back alleys I'd gotten stuck in. Still, it was intriguing. A hidden bar away from the busy streets sounded interesting. Maybe I could invite my co-workers over. Make it seem like I found something special instead of just admitting I was lost. I stepped up to the door and pushed it open. The hinges creaked softly as I entered. Inside, the bar was cozy, almost too cozy. It felt like stepping into a different time. The lighting was dim, casting everything in a warm amber glow. The furniture was old and wooden, the chandeliers dusty, and the jukebox in the corner played soft music that I couldn't quite place. It was like something out of a dream or a forgotten memory. I walked to the bar and sat on one of the tall stools. There were other people scattered around the room, but no one was talking. They all seemed focused on their drinks, lost in their own worlds. The air felt thick with a strange sense of familiarity, as if everyone here knew something I didn't. The bartender was a tall man with grey hair and a face that looked like it was carved from stone. He stood behind the bar, slowly polishing a glass with deliberate movements. He didn't notice me at first. I pulled out my phone, ready to call Jason and tell him to check out this place. Just as I was about to dial, a deep, gravelly voice broke the silence. "What do you think you're doing?" I looked up, startled. The bartender was staring at me, his face expressionless, his eyes dark and unreadable. I was just calling my friends. I thought they might want to join me here," I stammered, thrown off by his tone. He didn't smile or move. "Look, kid, we have some rules around here," he said in a low voice. I raised an eyebrow, half amused. "What? Like no phones at the bar or something?" The bartender didn't smile. He didn't move. "No," he replied, "not that kind of rules." There was a long pause, and the air in the bar felt heavier. "First rule," he began, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You can't seek out the bar intentionally. It only appears when you're lost, either physically or emotionally. If you tell anyone to find it, they never will." I waited for him to joke, expecting a smile, but his face stayed serious. I couldn't help but laugh a little, trying to ease the tension. "Right, sounds fitting," I said, ignoring him. I continued my call, telling Jason about the bar. I described the vintage decor and the strange vibe, hoping to pique his interest. Jason sounded confused. "I've never heard of any bar like that downtown," he said. "But sure, we'll come meet you anyway." As soon as the call ended, I looked around the bar more carefully. Something was wrong. The other patrons looked like they were from different times. A man in a fancy suit that looked like it was from the 1940s sat by the window, sipping a drink. A woman in a vintage dress, maybe from the 80s, sat in a corner staring at her glass. The more I looked, the more I realized everyone didn't seem to belong to the same world, let alone the same time. An uneasy silence filled the room, thick and heavy, as if everyone knew something terrible that no one wanted to talk about. I was lost in my thoughts when my phone rang. It was Jason. His voice sounded annoyed, like he was done with the joke. "There's nothing here, man," he said. "We've walked up and down the alleys, and there's no bar, no sign, no lights. Are you messing with us?" I frowned, my stomach twisting with confusion. "No, I'm serious. I'm sitting inside right now. It's called the Lost Bar. You can't miss it." Jason sounded frustrated. "I don't know what to tell you. We're standing where you said, and there's nothing here." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I looked around the bar again, noticing how the patrons moved slowly, as if time didn't matter to them. "I'll come outside," and, before I could finish, a hand landed on my shoulder. It was the bartender. His grip was cold, almost unnatural. When I turned to look at him, his expression was completely flat, no emotion at all. "Second rule," he said in a low growl, Under no circumstances should you leave the bar before midnight. The bar has its own schedule. If you try to leave before the clock strikes 12, you'll find yourself unable to return to the life you knew. My heart pounded as his words sank in. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was a joke, but the feeling in the air was undeniable. I glanced at the clock on the wall behind the bar. It read 10 o'clock. This was ridiculous. I shook my head and lifted my phone to my ear again, ready to tell Jason I was coming out. But when I brought the phone to my ear, all I heard was static. Something wasn't right. I looked back at the bartender and saw his face had changed. His cheeks were stretched unnaturally, his grin wider than possible, and his eyes were dark, empty voids. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, my mind spinning. I turned away, desperate to escape his twisted face, only to realize that every single patron in the bar was now staring at me. Their faces were blank, their eyes emotionless, but their heads turned in unison, following my every move. I managed to get off the bar stool, my legs shaking, and began to slowly walk toward the door. I didn't dare run or make any sudden moves. The patrons' eyes stayed fixed on me, their gazes piercing through me like knives. As I reached the door, the static on my phone returned, crackling in my ear with a low, distorted sound. But beneath the static, I heard the bartender's voice. "Third rule," it said, low and distorted. "Never look at the clock. Time doesn't move the same inside the bar. If you look at the clock, you'll start to see things around you, like faces shifting and patrons vanishing." My mind raced, thoughts spinning. I slowly turned back to the bar, my eyes landing on the bartender again. His face was calm and unreadable, but I could still see the flicker of that terrible grin. This wasn't a joke. I stepped away from the door, my heart pounding. I couldn't leave yet, not before midnight. I walked back to the bar, keeping my head down to avoid the patron's stares and the clock's gaze. I could feel their eyes following me, the weight of their stares pressing down on me. But I didn't look at them or the clock. I sat down again, my hands trembling as I rested them on the bar. The bartender turned to me, his expression still neutral. "Kid," he said slowly, "you've broken the rule." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "But you didn't tell me the third rule in time," I replied. The bartender's lips curled into a faint smile. "You didn't," he said. I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of what had happened pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. I looked around the bar, trying to calm myself. The patrons went back to their drinks, their conversations continuing as if nothing had happened. A small wave of relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The bartender reached under the bar and pulled out a small, yellowed piece of paper. He scribbled something on it and slid it across the counter toward me. "These are the rest of the rules," he said calmly. "You'd best follow them." I picked up the paper with trembling hands and began to read. "Fourth rule: if you see my reflection in the bar mirror, don't speak." Fifth rule: if an old man sits next to you at the bar, always offer him a drink. Sixth rule: if the entrance door opens on its own, don't look. Seventh rule: never acknowledge the woman in the red dress. Eighth rule: don't turn around